from my own work and as a thinker, I wanted to proclaim, or at least start, another set of thoughts running, which was that, above all else, art needs time and space and permission for this vulnerable, open-hearted and open-ended act of making, which is at an exact parallel to what it's like to be a human and have human relationships. You know, that you can't go into any human relationship, whether it's in a personal level or at a community level, with a sort of, this is how I am, this is what I expect to get out of this relationship in advance, and I'm going to tell you my expectations in advance. You know, that you can't do that. And I set up a space called Metal in West Hampstead, which was entirely to do with following up my own and other artists' hunches that they believed that something that they had in their head could be made and should be made, but they didn't want to articulate what it was going to be. They certainly weren't going to apply for it. And I did it as a sort of set of personal residencies, my own included, that was about people coming and following their hunches. And my thing that I observed, and I still believe this, was that the quality of the projects that emerged from people not applying for anything and not knowing what they were going to do in advance was likely to be equal, if not superior, to any of the things that they said they were going to do if you'd asked them to put it down on paper. So it was predicated on invitation only. Nobody had to commit themselves to what they were going to do. But everybody had to be very generous about each other's time and space and permission. And it was me as well, I think, as a leader, trying to work with the Arts Council, which I did to some effect, to say, unless you start pulling out of this whole target-driven language, you're really destroying the very thing you're trying to protect. And it was, I'm sure I was one of many people arguing for that. But the fact that, you know, you couldn't make art from the starting point, that there was a finished idea at the end of it. And that institutions even shouldn't be trying to use that language in a heavy-handed way, because they drove out the possibility for real creative change. Well, Metal now has 3 spaces. It has a space in Liverpool. We've taken over Edge Hill Station in Liverpool. And we also have a house in Kensington, which is a sort of economically diametrically opposed space to Kensington in London. And we have this new hall, Chalkwell Hall, which is a 19th century hall in a park in Southend. And they're all spaces that are by invitation only, and for time and space and permission to be given to artists. And most of those artists are visual artists. And that's because I think there is another part of what I was trying to investigate, and still am, which is that by and large, although I come from a storytelling tradition, which is a theatre tradition, and storytelling in that context tends to be, you know, quite straightforward narrative, as in Once Upon a Time There Was, that visual art tends to be another way of seeing, a much more lateral way of seeing things, something which looks at something and then turns it around and looks at it from another perspective altogether. And that in my experience, the visual arts movement has always been a way of society reflecting something new to itself that it hadn't thought before, it hadn't seen it from that perspective before. And although I think that other art forms can, you know, can vie for permission, for position, and probably would attack maybe what I'm just saying, it's been my experience that visual arts opens the door to new frameworks. And so perhaps in trying to tie up my belief that society is changed by art, and also my belief that artists need time and space to decide how they come at that themselves, this paradox of saying that you have to leave that to the artist, but at the same time you have to give artists contexts and relationships with communities that allow the breadth of the artistic thinking to be of real benefit to communities. These are the 2 things I think that I try to put together in Metal. And that's because I really believe that within many, many artists, in their casual conversation through to the work that they make, that their ability to interact with communities, I won't just say community problems, but community issues, is so significant as a power an opportunity that both sides benefit from, that we ought to be doing everything possible to make it normal for artists to be working and living in communities as people who are as useful but self-determining as somebody who's a landscape gardener or a carpenter. And it's been my experience that many visual artists, in pursuing their career, feel that their career can only operate via a sort of institutional and gallery framework, and actually taking them outside of that framework and saying that it is up to them to determine their relationship with making and who receives what they make seems to me to be a very important next step for the way that art operates in society. And not to take up much more time because we've all got these little slabs, but I think that just looking at what's happened in Liverpool and looking at what's happening in Southend, the impact of artists' thinking on community endeavour and the kind of the opening up of the imaginative potential of communities through the language that artists naturally bring, and their uncompromising relationship to their own creativity, which is a big inspiration for other people to feel that their imagination can count too, and that they can value their imagination. These are things that I have seen as transformative properties in communities. Nothing to do with whether you do or don't like the piece of public art that's been made by consultation. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about the realization inside individuals and community groups. Well, yes, that imagination is a commodity that matters and has an outcome that isn't always a framed piece of art, but is definitely a piece of imaginative change making. And that can be anything from the way meetings are conducted to, the way lights are created. It can be lots of things. So my argument, just in terms of metal, is let's find as many interfaces as possible between artists and the work that they might want to do, and communities and what they're thinking about, without in any way trying to drive artists down the kind of propaganda route of art must equal social change. And to finish, really, back round the circle towards South Bank Centre, when I came to South Bank Centre, there were many things that I wanted to do and still want to do. One of them was to make sure that the Hayward, with all its totally idealistic positioning as when it began in '67, I really wanted to make sure that that idealism was revived, because I think that no idealism should be allowed to be trampled just by the kind of hurly-burly of history. It's got to be kept going. Flames that were lit have got to be lit again. And so, with Ralph at the helm, putting the Hayward back on the map seemed to me terribly important. However, at the same time, to undermine as much as possible the idea that institutions determine how art making happens. So on a completely different level, we have a group of artists in residence and an increasing development of an artist colony who more operate like a virus inside the organisation, not only doing work that they want to do, but also sort of tackling how the institution operates and challenging how the institution operates. Because if it is an artist, because in the end I think that institutions need to be vision-led and artist-led much more than they are. And I think that otherwise they become kind of slightly Byzantine in their power structures, which I think is unhealthy. So I'm always looking for how an intimate model like metal could, by a process of cellular multiplication, work on a large scale, but still remain intimate in its thought processes.